Today's talk will be an elaborate explanation of this theme, which is a verse from the hymn called Dakshinamurti, that is the form that confers blessings. It's a hymn to Shiva and written by Shankaracharya. Humans are curious, and that marks us. And it's natural, for the mind itself does not like to stay in ignorance. It wants to know. When it looks around, it wants to see things and know things. And there are some people who will not just look at the surface of things, but go down deeper and try to ask and know some of the fundamental questions. Why did this universe come into being? Why did it exist? What is the meaning and purpose of life? Why are we here? These questions itself speak of an underlying ignorance, but there is a curiosity to know it. In the ancient sages, we have this inquiry also, and they understood these answers by looking within. They saw that there are structures of consciousness. They studied the structures of consciousness and linked those studies with their own meaning and purpose of life. So when you read cosmology, does it touch you? Does it affect you? Or there's something that you need to know about some supernovas or black holes? Does it really ring a bell out here? If it does, then you are linking both the macro and the micro. And that is how the sages looked at things. They've seen this great panorama of the world spread before them, and they studied consciousness in order to understand this panorama. This is the factor within us. Yeah, it is kind of the fundamental thing that we are not aware of, how we are linked, so closely linked to everything around us. So we've been talking about structures and substructures in the last few months, if you all attentive one. Today we are going to study the structures of consciousness. And let's take you to a journey through something called Kashmiri Shaivism. Kashmiri Shaivism, obviously Kashmir is a state in North India, and that's the reason why they gave the name. The theology is Trika, threefold, and that's the reason why the three factors in all beings. So this Trika Shaivism, I'll have to use some of the technical terms. I'll be constrained to use, but I will try to explain them, because this philosophy, which rose somewhere around 850 Common Era, which was a development of an earlier system of Shiva worship. In that, the earlier worship was, the ontology was, you can be a distinct Shiva. You can come up to this level through the grace of Shiva. But in this Trika, 3, said no, you can become that Shiva as it is, not distinct from that. You are that. So that was a major difference. And this philosophy spread. It became a pan-Indian, you can say, philosophy. And there are derivatives also of that. So it's a long development. The two great proponents were Utpala Deva and Abhinava Gupta. This is just to kind of put it on record. And the main book is Vijnana Bhairava Tantra. Now, when we talk about Shiva, especially this philosophy, you've got to take away all ideas of personality, as in the sense of name and form, which is difficult for most of us because we are embodied. And because of this anthropic principle, we say everything, gods and animals and birds and everything, we see through this anthropic principle. And that's why we have the philosophy or the theology of anthropomorphism. God is a big person. And we think animals and everything else, they think like humans. They interact with us, so they think like, no, they think like animals. Sorry, they think like birds. And this is the anthropic principle. We kind of project our image on everything and say this is meaningful and that is not meaningful. So to come out of the meshes of this anthropic principle, you need to think about that infinite one as without name and form. So these three factors, Shiva has a trident, the 3 prongs. Like we have some of these Greek gods, we also have those prongs. Poseidon. So these are the 3 factors. So these we'll go down slowly, but the principal philosophical force comes through something called recognition. I recognize. Is that moment. And it's not that ordinary moment. I am that infinite one. It's called technically pratyabhijna, that recognition. Till that recognition doesn't come, you got to work at it. Every cognition is nothing but a recognition. When I see something, I relate this present cognition with my past cognition and I recognize this object. So cognition is not just simple. It involves both the conscious and the subconsciousness. And there is so we are recognizing this world every moment. But there we stop. We are not recognizing the deeper structures in this fabric of the universe. So this deeper recognition comes with this philosophy. Okay. This in brief is the philosophy of recognition. Okay, pratyabhijna. It is not new to this Kashmiri Shaivism. I use the word Kashmiri Shaivism because it arose in those areas. But it's generally Trika Shaivism. Literally, it's Trinity. So even we have the Trinity, but we have something slightly different. Trinity. Another fundamental aspect of this philosophy is vibrations, spandana. So what is vibrating? Everything is vibrating. Yeah, you look deeper and it's all vibrating. So everything is vibrating. Well, you may call it some string or super strings or whatever, but it's vibrating. Those guys are kind of trying to come to this idea of vibration. Oh, atoms and everything is vibrating. But in this philosophy, it's consciousness that's vibrating because of two aspects. One is because of its aspect of freedom, swatantriya, and the other aspect is of power. So consciousness vibrates because it is free and it has its own power. So this is the doctrine of spandana, vibration. It vibrates. Okay. Now, this Kashmiri Shaivism, Trika Shaivism, is kind of closely linked to the doctrines of Advaita Vedanta. But there is a slight difference. He said because of the vibrations, this world appears as a manifestation of the vibrations. Okay. So this world or the universe and all beings are nothing but an appearance of this vibration. Everything is vibrating, constantly vibrating. Consciousness is in its vibratory mode. So that is called illumination also, prakash, and vimarsha, reflective consciousness. So consciousness has a dual, you can say, role here. As we can see, I can look out the side and I can also think of myself looking outside. There is a degree of self-awareness. I am aware of my internal world, I am aware of the external world also. So from that they took the cue that yes, it's light and it is also reflecting that light. So the luminosity and the dynamism in this. Of course, it's a huge system of philosophy. I am giving you the basics and tailoring it down to something that we can digest and we can integrate it in our lives. Okay. So there are two things. Like I said, it's the principal doctrine is the doctrine of recognition. You recognize yourself. It's an old Vedic, an old Vedantic idea of recognition. It's called, even Shankaracharya uses the word pratyabhignya, but recognition. And the other is the doctrine of constant vibration of consciousness. So these are some of the principal structures of consciousness. Okay. Now we'll come down to the three factors in all beings. This is something that we need to kind of see. The first triad is Shiva. Now Shiva, now like I said again, don't bring your ideas of anthropomorphism. Okay. So here this idea is of transcendent reality. Okay. Then there is something called a Shakti, the power that is transcendent at the same time immanent. And the third is the anu, the individual. Technically it's called the atom. So the individual. Okay. Now the microcosm. So there is a kind of a telescoping of the transcendent and the immanent into the individual, the anu, because each atom reflects the whole universe. And this was an experience Swami Vivekananda had one time in the Himalayas, when he writes to his brother disciple who was there, Gangadhar. Gangadhar, who was Swami Akhandananda. One of the greatest problems of my life has been solved, he writes. I have seen the universe in an atom. Now that is something. So Shiva, Shakti and Anu. That is Shiva and the power Shakti, everything. And the individual. Okay. This is okay, this is okay. Everything is fine. The next is, if you see within ourselves, we have hundreds of memories and hundreds of things around. Yeah, but they are within three main structures. Ichcha Shakti, the power of wanting or desiring or willing, the willpower, you can say, the willpower. And once you have willed, there is something other than that. It's called the power of knowledge, Jnana Shakti. Okay. And then there's a third power, Kriya Shakti, the power to do from the karma. So there's three powers: willing, knowing and working it out is the basic foundation of all minds and bodies, of everything, including gods. Yeah, it cannot be like I have something and you don't have something. No. God is impartial. He gives everybody everything. Everything. It's the degree of manifesting something more or something less. But these three powers are there. The power of wanting, of willing, the power of knowing, and the power of working it out. Because thought itself needs to be embodied. We are embodied thoughts. And that's what Indian philosophy teaches us. No thoughts can go without it being embodied. Otherwise, you're going to have trouble. Otherwise, thoughts are just fancies. And that's why we have been built with sensory and motor systems. It cannot be otherwise. Every thought can and should be translated. Of course, the good ones. People might take it literally and said, oh. So this is what. And if you see, I'm asking you to do just embody the good thoughts, but there are some people who embody bad thoughts also. Yeah, you go to certain areas of the city or some places, you'll see that evil just hits you. What's that? It's just that embodied, you can say, evil thought. So these are the three powers in the mind. Fascinating, isn't it? These guys, they really went down to this. So Shiva, through his power of willing, said, I am one, let me be many. This is the power that drives us, the willing. Okay, it comes from knowing. And then Shiva, what he does, he sees the entire process of creation, right down to its minutest details. Not about my pleasure and pain, but the pleasure and pain of each and every soul in this universe. And it's not only the living souls, I mean embodied souls here, there are the disembodied and everything. It's a vast complex of souls working out these three powers. And God knows them in intimate details. And the power of doing. When the thought is embodied. So we as well as the universe and everything are nothing but the embodied thought and will and knowledge of God. So we reflect that primal impulse, and that's what this is also the primeval impulse within us. So we just can't get away from it. We've got to be there. So they also talk about the Pati and the Pasha and the Pashu. Okay, Pati is the Lord, Shiva. Pasha is a bondage. And Pashu is a human soul. So the human soul is in bondage. Okay. So how can it get rid of bondage? Go to the Lord. So this is, even Sri Ramakrishna used to kind of have a play on words there. He actually says, have you passed? Now, pass is, he used to pronounce it in such a way that it used to sound like pash. Pasha is bondage. So you pass your exams, you're bound by your exams. So these are three entities, the three powers, the primeval powers called transcendence, para. They are also recognized as three goddesses. The transcendent goddess, the power, the immanent goddess, and the, you can say, apara Shakti. So para Shakti, para apara, and apara Shakti. So these three goddesses, again, don't personalize it. It's just impersonal ideas of transcendence and immanence and the individual. So these are the three forms of goddesses of the power. So every one of us, oh, I feel like a goddess. A woman might say, I feel like a goddess. You should really feel like a goddess because you are a goddess in reality. Then the three aspects of knowledge, the subject, the modalities of knowing, and the object. These three things, these three factors bind the mind. The mind has to work through these things only. The pramatri, the pramana, and prameya. So the subject, the cognizing subject, how the cognition takes place through the instrumentality of the mind and the senses and the light and etc., and then the object. So this is the three aspects. Three states of consciousness, we know that. The waking and the dream and the deep sleep. So these are the states of consciousness. We are not talking about waking and dreaming and deep sleep. These are the three states of consciousness. But it is more manifest during these states. Threefold paths that each, the power of willing, the power of knowing, and the power of doing, have their individual paths chalked out for them, which we will look into. Then the Transcendent Triad. Yeah, that's another thing. What's Transcendent Triad? It is called Para, the Supreme. It's called luminosity. Just luminosity, because the reality has to be self-luminous. You don't need to have another reality to authenticate this reality. Otherwise, we get into something called anavastha dosha, regresses ad infinitum. So your soul is Swayam Prakash, self-luminous. It knows itself and knows everything. It comes in the form of I, this, I am this. Again, the triad. Yeah, I mean, we are going a little deeper and into deeper waters. But don't worry, I'll try to keep things a little simplified. So the transcendence is something called self-luminous. And when that luminosity has to become dynamic, and when it creates this world, on what does it create on itself, that's called a vimarsha. Okay. It's creating on itself. Yeah, you know in Indian mythology we have all these shape shifting monsters, plenty of them all over the place. And our minds also are like that. It's all it morphs into something else and something else and something else. We are also shape shifting. Then we go to the gym and we want to morph into something else. So it, as it were, paints the picture of the universe on itself. She is a canvas and she is a painter and she is painting it. And then there is something called samarasya, the homogeneous bliss. What's that? You see, reality cannot be dry. And if it is dry, no point in going to that reality. So it's homogeneous bliss. So self-luminosity, the entire act of creation itself, rather projection, is nothing but just bliss, bliss, and bliss. Oh, how blissful we are. That's just a particle. Just a particle of that is now. I had given a talk on the degrees of bliss. And the degrees of bliss in this gross universe is just a particle. And they kind of teach you, if there is a young person who is cultured, learned in the Vedas, who is young and who is strong and who is the king of the whole world. Now imagine that person's bliss. That is one unit of bliss. Now multiply it by 100 and there is something called Gandharva, and then there is a Deva Gandharva. It goes on increasing 100 by multiples of 100. So here we are at the lowest level of vibration, as they say. The grossest, we don't even have any bliss. How blissful this is. No, you don't know what bliss is. It's very painful. But if you know, then you can get that bliss. Because that factor is there in you. It's luminosity, prakasha, vimarsha, the dynamism, and the bliss. So to know the three factors is to know and to attain that kind of bliss. Okay. The three impurities. Because that is what covers the entire luminosity and the kind of dynamism and the bliss. The three are the dirt of embodiment. You know, Sri Ramakrishna used to say, when you take up a body, you've got to pay the taxes. Oh, it's very simple. You know, it's kind of so the very act of embodiment contains you. That's a mistake. We wanted to eat some chocolate candies. And you know what the universe does? You want to eat chocolate? Okay. Wait, let me create this universe first for you. Oh yeah. And she creates a universe first, because you need to get it from trees, and then trees don't grow just like that. And you have to have all the weather systems and all the everything. So I'll create the universe for you, then I'll give you a chocolate. Okay. Be happy. And then you eat, so beautiful. You don't know how much this entire consciousness has worked to give you that. So you can see the impurity of embodiment, the impurity of Maya, taking one thing for another. We take reality for the unreality. And the impurity of karma. we know exactly what is right and what is wrong. And yet, many times, we do something that is not right. This is the three factors, all the good and the bad also. Okay. So, one of the quotations by a very famous philosopher is, there is one great divinity, and it is the very inner self of all creations. It embodies itself as all things. It's full of unbroken consciousness of the three kinds. I, this, and I am this. This is an indubitable, you can say, fact in your consciousness. So, there is one unbroken, you can say, ocean of consciousness where some things arise and you feel, yeah, this is me, grasps. So, there are these three main, you can say, pathways according to the power of willing, the power of knowing, and the power of doing. Okay. So, nothing comes easy. Recognition, to come to that point of recognizing yourself as Shiva, Shivoham, it needs a little work. You got to work out all those impurities that you have gathered over and over again. Listen, I won't go into the technical details of this, but the first is the power of willing, power of working, or you can say, we will take the first, the power of working. We got to work. So, all this work, I mean, you're meditating, you're doing japa, you're doing puja, you're doing this, you're doing all that, that is work. So, they say there are the 6, you can say, limbs of this yoga. They call it yoga also. First is pranayama, control of the prana. If those of you who have been following some of these teachings will know what real pranayama is. Prana is the universal, you can say, force that is existent in the universe, and controlling that. By controlling the prana, that's here. Pranayama, concentration, dharana. Now, concentration is when I meditate, suppose I meditate on this podium here. It's not a just simple meditation. We speak about meditation. But this concentration goes much deeper, and you can get in touch with the subtle elements. And that's what the Upanishads also speak. When the subtle perceptions from fire and water and all these things arise within you, then it's concentration. You know, subtle elements of fire, it's called a tanmatras. So, fire has a subtle element, earth has a subtle element, water has a subtle element, space has a subtle element. So, your concentration gets so deep, you come in touch with the subtle world. That is what is called concentration. Then something called tarka. You remove off some of the misjudgments that you have done. So, when you meditate, it's not something like a kind of a discursive thought, but you are using your discernment like a knife to cut out things that are extraneous to your object of meditation. Okay. So, judgment or cogitation, something that's while you're meditating, some thought comes which is 20 years old, something happened to you. Push it away. That's what. Then comes meditation, plunging into, becoming one with it. When the differences between the subject and the object, or the object of meditation and the subject, are eradicated, and you become one with that. That is called meditation. And when you get deeper and deeper into that, it becomes samadhi. And then the last is where you can pratyahara, you can pull out your entire mind, that is, you kill your own mind. Yeah, that is another. But of course, this comes with great difficulty. It won't come, to kill your own mind. How do you kill your own mind? Put the mind back into its seed form, like you do it when you go to deep sleep. Mind goes back there. So they attain that kind of sameness. The yoga scriptures talk about like an object reflected very clearly in a crystal or a glass. Such is the degree of, you can say, absorption, tanmayata. So you can. The second is the power of knowing, jnana shakti. It's nothing. Everything that is incompatible with reality is thrown out. It is using one's cognitive abilities, which have been sometimes, most of the time, sharpened through this kriya, this the work aspect. So again, you remove off all that which is not the reality and think of the reality. Yeah, that is the jnana yoga, as I say, the yoga of knowledge. So these are the, you can say, Swamiji talks about it. Like, at my will, the mountains will crumble. I will drink the ocean. Such is the energy of these people. So Sri Ramakrishna also says that, he speaks about these things. That, yeah, if a thorn goes into a kind of side and you need another thorn to pull it out. It was bleeding. So, but to say that there is no thorn and there is no blood and there is no pain, nothing, that is another state of consciousness. So these are the jnana yogis. They use the power of, you can say, knowing. Ideally, it is the combination of all these three powers. You're practicing, you're working out your spiritual practices, you're focusing cognitively on their reality, and then the idea of willing. Suppose, thought gets its power through will, and will comes through repeated actions. You see person exhibiting tremendous willpower. That is not come through one day. It has come through repeated practice. That will has been strengthened. And as that will is strengthened, that person can display that kind of power. So these are the three factors with their three disciplines, sadhana. But there is another one, the methodless method, they say. Yeah, everybody likes that. I don't need to go through all these things, somebody will say. What's the easy way out? The methodless method. But that's meant only for the few elite, you can say, spiritual practitioners, where the Guru gives you or tells you what you are and you immediately recognize yourself as that. That's pratyabhijnayate. So you recognize yourself as that transcendent, immanent, and yet embodied. The embodiment is just a kind of an illusion. Your real nature is that. Then you can say, Shivoham, I am Shiva, I am Shiva. This is the doctrine of, in brief, of what is called 28Aug Shaivism, the Shiva doctrine of the three factors, which is also called Kashmiri Shaivism. As I said, we are curious about the fundamentals of nature, fundamentals of reality. So this is one way of approaching this, to understand its very deeper and deeper aspects which are also within us, to unravel these deeper aspects, and then you will find they are now within your grasp. So to use the power of will, the power of knowing, and the power of wanting, to focus them all on the goal of that impersonal, transcendent, immanent, embodied reality. Om, peace, peace, peace.